first question is, do clients have to comply with any formalities if they enter into a nuptial agreement in Switzerland?
Oh yes, they have to have a written agreement, and it has to be notarized. And you know, compared to England, there are only a few topics that you can put in a nuptial agreement. So it's only about the assets. You know, you can only have agreements on the assets. You may not do, you know, agree on anything regarding maintenance. It's just not accepted by Swiss courts.
Thank you. And Kath Carlin?
Yes, again, we need a formal written anti-nuptial agreement. It must be signed and dated by witnesses, not notarized, but definitely signed and dated. You can add pretty much anything you want to the agreement, but what you cannot do is exclude provision for maintenance, either spousal maintenance or child support. So whilst you can actually add in provision for maintenance or child support, you can't exclude either of them.
Thank you. I think the next person I was going to ask was Susan, California.
Yeah. So in addition to the agreement being entered into voluntarily, free from fraud, undue influence, coercion, or duress of any kind, enforceable premarital agreements in California must comply with the requirements of the Uniform Premarital Act. And that act requires that the agreement be in writing and signed by both prospective spouses, that the individual against whom enforcement is sought be represented by independent counsel when the agreement is signed, or after being advised to seek independent counsel, the individual expressly waives representation in a separate writing. The advisement to seek independent counsel must be given at least 7 calendar days before the final agreement is signed. What's also super important is that the disclosure of property and financial information must be fair, reasonable, and full. There must be at least 7 calendar days between the time a final agreement is first presented to the prospective spouse and the time it is signed, regardless of whether the prospective spouse is represented by legal counsel. A self-represented prospective spouse must be fully informed of a premarital agreement's terms and basic effect, as well as the rights and obligations a self-represented prospective spouse is relinquishing by signing the agreement, with such advice memorialized in writing. So that's when you have one spouse is represented by counsel and the other spouse isn't. I personally don't think that's a good idea, because it is always subject to some kind of attack when it doesn't give the prospective spouse who is unrepresented an entirely full description of those things that I just mentioned. And the agreement cannot be promotive of divorce, and the agreement cannot be unconscionable when executed.
Thank you, Susan. And the position in Italy, Francesca?
Well, the position in Italy is quite similar to the position in Switzerland as Katja was describing it. So the only nuptial agreement that is recognized by the law is the agreement regarding assets and what happens with assets that are acquired during marriage. It has to be a written agreement and a notarized agreement. The only exception is if the choice of how assets during the marriage are going to be dealt with is made at the moment of the marriage and registered in the Marriage Act. There is a default system, which is the community of assets that are owned during and after the marriage. If you don't make that a different choice at the moment of the marriage, this is what your assets will look like, and the property regime will be that. There aren't much alternatives that you can choose. There is a separation of assets, and that is something that you can decide at the moment of the marriage or afterwards if you change your mind.